Welcome. If you want to build high-performance APIs with Python, you have come to the right place. FastAPI is a modern framework built on two key pillars. First is Starlet, which handles the web routing and is incredibly fast, allowing us to leverage asynchronous Python. Second is Pydantic, which handles all data validation and serialization. The combined result is a framework that is on par with Node.js and Go in terms of speed, but gives us the simplicity and robustness of Python type hints, as well as automatic interactive documentation. Before we start, let's set up the environment using the fastest Python tool available, UV. UV will make you forget slow pip in manual virtual environments. UV handles it all. It is an extremely fast Python package and project manager. To install it, go to this page. I will leave the link to this page in the description. Ensure you have UV installed. If I scroll down, you will see the installation instructions. For those on macOS and Linux, copy this command in your terminal and paste it and hit enter. Those on Windows, copy this command, paste it in PowerShell and hit enter. Or you can install it from PyPy using pip or pipx. I have a Mac, so I'll copy this and go to my terminal and paste it, hit enter, wait for it to download. Here we are. Everything has been installed. Go ahead and create a directory. In my case, I'll use a command called mkdir to create a directory, but you can create a directory however you like. And then I'll call it FastAPI_course. Then I will open this project, or this directory rather, in VS Code. So VS Code is a code editor. And when you install VS Code, it comes with a command in your terminal called code, which you can use to open directories. If you want to install VS Code, go to this page and click the download button. If you're on macOS, you'll see download for macOS. If you're on Windows, you'll see download for Windows. And the same thing for Linux. I will leave the link to the description in this page. However, you can use any text editor of your choice. A text editor is simply a tool where we type our code and use it to execute our code. In our case, we shall be writing our FastAPI code in a text editor called Visual Studio. So make sure you do it as you like. If you want to use Visual Studio Code, go ahead. If you have another one, please also go ahead. You can still achieve the same goal. So after this, I'll say code FastAPI course. And of course, like I've told you, once you install VS Code successfully, you'll have the command code available to you in your terminal. When I hit enter, there we are. I have a new window open. I'll close this, make it bigger so you can see. Then I can now click terminal, new terminal. Okay, I can now collapse all these others. Okay, then reduce this so that you can see everything. So I want the terminal open. So you see we have a virtual environment called base, but this is created by Anaconda. I'll go ahead and say conda deactivate. If you do not know what Anaconda is, do not bother. So I'll clear my screen. Then the first thing I want to do is to initialize our project. I'll do that by running a command called uv init and hit enter. So you see, you get a message saying initialized project FastAPI course. We have a git ignore file, okay, which helps us to avoid certain files and directories to being tracked by Git. We have a file having the Python version. We have the main.py, simply having a main function with a print statement and an if statement, and we call that function. inside the block of the if statement. We have a PyProject.toml that is used for managing dependencies of our project, and then a readme.md, which is used to store basic information about our project. Now, the next thing we need to do is to install FastAPI. I can do that using the command uv. Say uv add FastAPI, okay, square bracket, standard, okay, close square brackets, then a quote, and hit enter. So you see, a virtual environment has been created for us automatically. And if I go to pyproject.toml, you will see that we have FastAPI already installed. With that, we can now start. But let's activate our virtual environment. I will clear my screen. Actually, before I clear the screen, you see we have an important tool called uvcon, which has been installed for us. uvcon is actually a high performance server which we shall use to actually run our application. So I will clear my screen, and then I can now say source, okay, then go to that, refer to my virtual environment, venv, like that, then /bin, then /activate, okay. Have I spelled it correctly? If I hit enter, it says no such file or directory. So that means I haven't done the right thing. I'll do it again. I'll say source. I'll say /, meaning this current directory. Then the directory actually starts with a period. It's .venv. So the previous command did not have a period at the beginning. So this folder name or directory name has a period. Do not forget that. Then I can say /bin, then activate. When I hit enter, you see now we have our virtual environment that has been activated. And the virtual environment is usually named after the project directory. This is good. Now let's move on to write our first endpoint. In this section, you will create your first API endpoint. Open main.py, select all the code, delete it. We shall do this in 3 simple steps, which are always the same. The first step is to import. Next is to instantiate. Next is define the root. We shall write simple Python and say from FastAPI import FastAPI, a basic Python import statement. Then create an instance of FastAPI and say app is the variable storing the instance equals to FastAPI with parentheses like that. After that, we can define the root. To define the root, I can create a function called define welcome, and this function simply returns a response. We shall have a dictionary having a key called message, and the value will be welcome to the best API. But this is not enough. We need to decorate this function. Remember, your Python, to decorate a function in Python, you say at rather, use the at symbol, then you can say app dot get. Get is an HTTP method used for retrieving data. Very soon we shall learn about the others. Then within here in the parentheses, put your quotes and have a /. So whenever we hit / on our API, we shall receive a message. FastAPI is smart enough to convert this dictionary into a valid JSON response. This can be, for example, / orders, if you're fetching orders in your e-commerce app, or / posts to fetch posts in your social media app. For now, we'll keep it simple as this. Let us fire up our API. To do that, go to the terminal and type FastAPI dev main.py. So main.py is referring to the module main.py that we just wrote. And then hit enter. If I expand this, you will see it says running in development mode. For production, use FastAPI run. Take note of that. And if I scroll up, it says using import string main app. Main refers to our module main, then app is referring to this instance called app. So if I copy this address, okay, and go to our browser, paste it and hit enter, you see we get the message saying welcome to the best API. Why? Because / defines the root of your API. Think about the root as the starting point or the first path of any API. Isn't that nice? In addition to that, if I go back to the terminal, you see we have our documentation ready at the same location but /docs. So /docs is added for us. If I say /docs and hit enter, there we are with our interactive documentation. And for now, we only have one path, okay, which is very okay. And you can see they tell us we have no parameters. We shall learn about parameters soon. And you see the responses, you say we get a code 200 for a successful response. Let's go ahead with learning everything else that we need to know about FastAPI. When we build a RESTful API, we use different HTTP methods for different actions. In this course, we shall create a basic item inventory API. The different actions involve things like retrieving data. You can retrieve data or retrieve all the inventory items. We can create a new inventory item. We can decide to completely replace an existing item. We can decide to remove an item, or we can decide to partially, can I spell partially correctly? Partially update an item. To achieve the action of retrieving, we need a method called get. Okay, follow me closely. We use get. To be able to create a new item, we use post. To be able to completely replace an item, we use a method called put. To be able to remove an item, we use a method called delete. To be able to partially update an item, we use a method called patch. FastAPI gives us decorators to help us achieve these actions. Like you see, yesterday we simply applied get. So to retrieve, we simply use app.get. To be able to create a new item, we use app.post. To be able to completely replace an existing item, we use app.put. You guessed it. Okay. And again, this has to be a decorator. So I'll put the @. Then to be able to remove an item, we use the app app.delete HTTP method. Then to be able to partially update an item, we use app.patch. So these are the methods you can work with. Let us move on to understand path operations even deeper by understanding path parameters. We often need to retrieve a specific resource. In our item inventory API, we would need to retrieve an item, let's say with number 5. For this to happen, we need to make the URL dynamic using what they call path parameters. To understand this, let me get rid of this code. Create a function to retrieve all items. I'll say app.get, why get? Because I want to retrieve all items. I can say /items, like that. And then I can go to the next line and define the function operation, say fetch items. And then I can simply return an empty list for now. When I go to the automatic documentation and refresh, you see we have fetch items added. To create a path parameter, in the event that we wanted to fetch only a single item, this is where a path parameter comes in. I'll say again app.get, okay? Then on the next line, I'll define a function called fetch underscore item. Not items, but item. And then I can simply return a dictionary representing an example of an item. Okay, let us say item with ID 5. But what if we want to fetch different items with different IDs? Maybe item with ID 7, 8, 10, whatsoever. We can have that in our path operation decorator by coming here, okay, and saying /items/ a specific item. And we can have a variable here for the item ID. To create this variable, we can create curly braces like this and then type the variable name. In this case, I'll say item ID. This makes item ID a path parameter. And to receive this path parameter in our function body, we have to define a function parameter that is named after this to match. So I can say item underscore ID like that. Okay, so that this name and this name actually make sense. And FastAPI will look at the path and inject the value for us into this variable. And then I can now put a full colon and say int. Just doing this gives us very nice magic. FastAPI simply and automatically validates that the input should be an integer using this Python type hint. And if a user types a letter, for example, the API will return a 422 unprocessable entity error. Let's go to the documentation and refresh. So you see we have it right here. Okay, if I go to try it out and then, for example, type something, so maybe 22, execute and move down, you see we get our response body having 10. Why 10 and not 22? Because I had coded it here. For it to be dynamic, I can remove the 10 and simply type our variable, say item underscore ID. If I go back and execute, you see we have item 22. If I change this to item 5 and execute, you see we have item 5. If I put here some letters, okay, and execute, you see we says, please the correct validation errors and try again. Item ID value must be an integer, okay? For item ID, value must be an integer. This is great. And if I clear the screen and probably cancel this and try to scroll down. It says 42 validation error. So this is the kind of error we get in case we send invalid data. And if you look at this, it shows you the structure of how the error message will look like. Isn't this awesome? It is to me. Let us look at query parameters in the next section. Query parameters are for optional filtering, searching, or pagination appearing after the question mark. I will show you this question mark in a moment. We define them as function parameters, not in the path. Once you define a variable in the path, like you see on line 16, it is a path parameter. But when you define them right here on line 13 as a function parameter, they are called query parameters. And they will be appended after a question mark in the path, like I'm going to show you. So right now, I can create something called limit, a function parameter called limit, and specify its type to an integer. Okay? So typically, these query parameters are optional. So we provide default values. I can say the limit will be 10. Okay? If I save this, I can go to the documentation, refresh, expand this. If you see this, it now says we have parameters. Okay? The name is limit, it's an integer, and it's a query parameter. It has a default value of 10. If I click try it out and execute, you will see that in the path, we now have a question mark. Okay, after items, we have a question mark and limit equals to 10. If I go back here, I can change this to maybe 15 and execute. If I come back here, you see, of course, our response is empty, but you see it has been appended, okay, or added to the path after a question mark. We can have more than one. How do we have more than one? I can go ahead and specify another function parameter. I can say skip, okay, skip, which is also an integer with a default value of maybe 5. If I save this and go back to the documentation, refresh the page, you see now I have two parameters. So I say limit, an integer, and it's a query parameter. Skip, an integer, and it's a query parameter. It has a default value of 5. If I click try it out, then scroll, execute, you see our path now has a question mark, limit equals to 10, then skip equals to 5. So limit and skip are separated by an ampersand. This is how query parameters are separated. So it's always a key, an equal sign to give it a value, a key, an equal sign to give it a value. I can change these values, for example, to 1 and then maybe to 3 and execute. You'll see our path has been changed. Limit and skip are techniques that you can use when you're paginating. Assuming maybe we had our items from our database, you can say return items, okay, when the limit, okay, is that. You can say limit to this, okay, maybe you want only 10 items, okay, something like that. This is a rough idea of what you would do, okay, or you'd say skip by doing maybe list slicing, okay, maybe you can say start from this part, okay, from skip from maybe 5 and end at maybe limit, okay. But this is just an example of how you'd apply limit and skip. But there are several ways of working with this. Of course, ideally, you'd work with a database, so apply the limit and the skip. Let's go on to study about combining both path and query parameters. You can combine both a path and query parameter. To illustrate this, let's go at the bottom and I'll define a path operation decorator. Let's say at app, dot get, then slash inside the quotes slash items, then forward slash a path parameter, item ID, then forward slash inventory. This can be the structure of our path. Then in the next line, I can define the path operation function by saying get underscore inventory item, or item inventory. Either way, still works. Okay, then within here, I can return something. Of course, for us to pick the value from the path, we need to define a function parameter called item underscore ID, and this is an integer. So FastAPI knows that item ID is a path parameter. In addition to that, I can say comma inventory. Okay, this time I can say str for string. So know that they can be strings too. FastAPI is smart enough to know that item ID in the path is a path variable, and that inventory, which is not in the path, is a query parameter. So do not worry. FastAPI will automatically map item ID to the path parameter, okay, and inventory as a query parameter based on where they are defined. So your function signature becomes the single source of truth for the entire endpoint's input. So let us then go ahead and return. You can say return, okay, item ID. Can maybe say item as a string, then item ID, the value. Okay, so the key is called ID item, then the value item ID. Then in addition to that, we can have another thing called inventory, okay, and then with the value inventory, okay, from the variable. If I go back to our documentation, I can refresh this. And then you see we have items, item ID, inventory. So look at this, both of them are required. To have an optional value, okay, for your query parameter, like you saw previously, make sure you give a default value. Okay, for example, maybe inventory equals to something random like that. If I save this and got to our documentation, you see we have a default value. But I'll remove this just to illustrate that some can be required depending on your requirements. So you see, item ID is an integer and is a path parameter, and it is required. Inventory, which is a string, is a query parameter. So under the list of parameters, we now see that we have a path parameter item ID and a query parameter called inventory. If I click try it out and execute, you see I'm supposed to pass the values required. I can say maybe 2, okay, and maybe give a random string, okay, just to test it out. Then if I execute and scroll to the bottom, you see we get item 2 and inventory, laptop. As simple as that. Let us now go into the next section where we're going to learn about the request body, Pydantic, and validation, how we achieve data integrity. For the post method, or even patch method, we need to guarantee the structure of the incoming body. This incoming body is usually a JSON body, or a body in the JSON format, which is simply a JSON string. We use Pydantic for this. We have to create a class that inherits from base model. At the top, I'll say from Pydantic import base model. Pydantic was installed for us when we installed FastAPI. Base model is simply a tool which will help us to check the structure of our data. Let's create the class that is going to inherit from base model. I'll say class item, which will represent an inventory item. Then we say it inherits from base model. And this class can have two properties or attributes, say name, which is a string. And then we can have, for example, field or price. Okay, why am I saying field? Price makes more sense. Of course, name and price are fields or attributes or properties of an item class. So I guess that's the reason I was typing field instead of price. And then I can say this is a float. If I go back right here and refresh, you will see that now we have nothing yet being shown. Okay, but in a moment, I'm going to show you what to do. But this is the contract, okay, which has our defined required types. We have a required name and a required price. If we want it to be optional, we can say the name is either a string or none, and the default value is none. This will make the name optional, but we want them to be required, so I'll leave it like so. Let us see how to receive the request body in the next section. Now we know that Pydantic helps us with data validation. This item class will help us with data validation. I'll move down right here and create a new operation or path operation. That would mean creating a path operation decorator and a path operation function. I'll say app.post, okay, to create the path operation decorator, to a path/items, then a function called create_item. Don't forget, this is the path operation decorator and this is the path operation function. Then what we need to do, which is the single most important step, is to use the Pydantic class up here called item. We can say item, we expect an item of type item, and we can simply return this item. Then I've missed a full colon right there. So if I save this and get back right here, you see we now have post/item. Says it has no parameters but has a request body, and I've given us an example value. Now, this is how Pydantic knows, or FastAPI knows, that this is a request body. It's not a path parameter, neither is it a query parameter, but it's part of the request body. That happens when you use a Pydantic base model. FastAPI automatically attempts to parse the body and validates the JSON body. If successful, it hands us a clean typed Python object. We can even use the dot notation. I can say item.name or item.price and do anything I want with it. Up here, I can create a dummy database and say database is equals to an empty list. And right here, I can say database.append item. Very simple, right? Then here in our fetch items, I can keep it simple and remove this list and simply return the database and maybe ignore the limit and skip for now. But you can implement some logic or simply use Python list slicing to fetch a part of your data using limit and skip. As an assignment, please do it and share in the comment section. If I now go back to the documentation, refresh, I can click try it out and click twice. Okay, click again, maybe change this value maybe to say 10. Okay, and change this maybe to laptop, execute. Now if I go back to fetch items, try it out, execute, you see we have a number of items in our dummy database. To enforce rules beyond basic type checking, we use the field utility. For our price, we'll enforce it's greater than 0. For the name, we'll enforce a minimum length of 2. This validation can happen instantly, preventing bad data from ever reaching your core logic. For this to happen, we need to import field from Pydantic. Then I can now come here and say equals to field parentheses and say GT, meaning greater than, okay, but this wouldn't make sense for field. So for field, I'll say min length equals to 2. And then for price, I'll say equals to field. I'll say GT equals to 2 probably, okay, or 0 to make it basic. So GT is for greater than, so meaning the price should be always greater than 0, and then name should have a minimum length of 2. To find out all other values that can be accepted by field, you can hover over it and read this, or simply check the official Pydantic documentation. Let's test this out. If I go right here, I can refresh and go to the post, click try it out. If I execute, you see we get a 200. Okay. If I put 0, execute, you see it fails. It says input should be greater than 0. You gave us a 0, and that 0 was the price property of the body. If I change the price, the value of the name rather, to maybe just an S and execute, you see we get a similar error. It says string should have at least 2 characters, okay? And the one for the price still exists. So if I change them back to what they should be, say this is laptop, this is 1000, scroll, execute. Do you see this? We now have proper success. Let us look at status codes next. So far, we've seen status codes like 200 for success, 42 for validation error. You can add your own. For example, when a post is successfully created, we can return a status code of 200. For that to happen, we need to go up right here and say import status from FastAPI. Then right here in the path operation decorator, put a comma, space, then status underscore code equals to status, okay, what we imported right here, dot, okay, we can look for created. And there we are. If I save, get back here, execute, you see we have a 201 this time. In case you want to know other status codes, I will leave a link in the description for you to read. But if you wanted to find out the others, you can simply say dot, okay, and see all the others, okay? So I'll leave this to the status code of created. In case things went wrong, for example, if we find that, say if item is already in database, okay, I can raise instead an HTTP exception. So from FastAPI, I can get HTTP exception, and then right down here I can say raise HTTP exception and pass a status code. Okay, so always raise an HTTP exception in case an error happens. And I can say status, okay, dot bad request, okay, 400 bad request. So HTTP 400 bad request, because you're trying to add something which is already in our database. And we can add a message by saying detail, okay, detail, lowercase, say detail equals to item already created. Save, get back here, refresh, and now say try it out, execute, we get it 201, execute again, you see, with detail item already created with a 400 bad request. So this is how you handle errors and status codes for your response. So this is for your response. This is when things go wrong. And it could be maybe internally on the server or when a user has a wrong data they have provided to us. So for client errors, simply send error codes in the range of 400. In case things go well, give us error codes in the range of 200. Of course, not give us, but give your client. Again, I will leave a link in the description where you can read more about these codes. It's very easy and not complex. Let's now talk about dependencies and security in the next section. Dependency injection is FastAPI's secret sauce for code reuse. A dependency is a function that is executed before your main path operation function. You inject it using another function called depends. I will show you in a minute what this function is. It is very perfect for shared utility logic like processing common query parameters. Let's define a dependency to process query parameters that we might need across several endpoints. Like I said, you inject a dependency using a function called depends. We can get this function from FastAPI. So where there's HTTP exception, I can say comma depends. Then we need to go to the function that needs a dependency. I'll assume that our function for fetching all items needs a dependency. So I can create a dependency, which will be a function that will be executed before the fetch items path operation. So I can create another module here. I can call it dependencies, dependencies.py. Then inside here, I can now create a function. I can call it common parameters. And this is going to be a function that will be used to process common query parameters. So let us, I want to disable autocomplete by AI. So let me see extensions. I think it has been disabled. I don't know why it's on. So disable, restart extensions. Okay. So I'll close this. So let's continue. I'll say common parameters. This function will receive a number of things. To receive Q. So Q will be a simple query parameter, which will be a string. So it can be a string or none. And the default value can be none. After that, I can have another one called skip, which will be an integer, and the default value will be 0, comma, the next one can be limit, and it will be an integer, default value 0, and that is it. And the return type for this function will be a dictionary whose keys are all strings, and the values can either be integers, strings, or none. Okay. Then after that, I can put a full colon and go to the next line and simply return a dictionary whose keys are the query and the value is the value in the variable Q. Then another key called skip whose value is in the variable skip. And then another key called limit whose value is in the variable limit. As simple as that. So I can now get back to main.py and import that function. So I'll say from dependencies, import, okay, you guess it, common parameter. So let me call it parameters. I need to name it well. Parameters, okay, in plural, like so. So I can copy this, come here, replace this name. Sorry, this shouldn't be there. Okay, this looks good. So now this function fetch item can now depend on the common parameters function. And I can now come here, okay, fetch items rather, and say we need maybe commons. I can call it commons, full colon, and say commons equals to, not full colon yet, but equals to depends, and it's going to depend on this function that we have just imported. So I can simply say depends on common parameters. That means common parameters is a function that will be executed before our path operation. As simple as that. And then I can go ahead to specify the return type of commons, or the type, not the return type, but the type of data that the commons variable is going to hold. And that is simply what is returned from our common parameters dependency. This will be a dictionary whose value, or whose strings rather whose keys are strings, and then the values are integers or strings or none. Actually, I would have just copied right this from here. Okay, all this is just the same as what is here. Now, in this function, instead of returning only the database, I can simply say my response data underscore data will be equals to, first of all, I can have a message saying items successfully fetched, something like that. Okay, then I can say parameters used, then I can pass the commands. Okay, then next up we can say the results will be what we have from our database. Then down here on line 28, I can then return the response data. So this will be data, not response date, like that. Sorry about that. Now let me run my server, say FastAPI not run, but dev main.py, because we're in the dev environment. Says cannot attempted relative import without known parent package. And I think that is happening because of this, okay, the dependencies. So what I can do is this. I can put all these into a module, not a module rather, but a package. I can say this is src for source. So let me put the main.py in the same source directory, apply the changes, and then I try to execute this again by saying src slash main.py, and there we are. Okay, so I guess that works because main.py and dependencies are in one package, and the init.py turns this source directory into a package. All right, let's continue. That was quite a good test. Now we can go to the documentation and try to interact with it. So if I look for fetch items, you see we have Q, which is a query parameter and a string. We have skip, which is an integer and a query parameter, limit, an integer and a query parameter. So if I click on try it out, I can say this is basic query, skip, maybe skip 1, maybe skip 10, limit maybe 20, okay, execute. So I using this to get the message successfully fetched, the parameters used, and of course the results. We have nothing for now because our database is an in-memory database and it is empty for now, which is okay. Now to prove something, if I go to dependencies and I put a print statement here and I say print called in dependency, Then go to main.py and I have another print statement here. I say print called in path operation. Save. Come here. If I execute this, I see this, we have called in dependency, then called in path operation. I just did this to show you that dependencies are functions which are executed before the path operation. So this was called first before this. Okay, so this is good. And you can actually apply them to a number of functions. And the actual benefit of these dependencies is that you can reuse or share utility logic. We can apply the same dependency to another path operation. For example, this one here. I can say comma. I say commons will be of type a dictionary whose keys are strings and values are either integers, strings, or none. None. And then this will be a dependency. Okay, the value will come from a dependency. This dependency is called the common parameters function. And then right here, I can say say commons. Let's return the commons and say commons. Okay, so a key commons whose value is coming from the dependency. Then if I get back here and probably maybe refresh first, go to this other one. Okay, item first, click try it out, then say item ID 12 query SS search. Okay, and leave these as their defaults. Execute. You see, we have all the query parameters. So this is a very basic way to understand what a dependency is. Let's talk about security with dependencies in the next section. We use dependencies to enforce security. We shall create a function called verify admin, which will be responsible for checking for a header. And we shall use a utility within FastAPI to help us pick a header. And then the principle will be that if the key is missing or if this key is incorrect, the dependency raises an HTTP exception with a status code of 403 forbidden, stopping the request. If it passes, then the main route is executed. So let's do this. I'll go to the dependencies.py and then define the dependency for authorization. I think I should probably name this so that you just track. So this is the first one. So this is our dependency. This was our dependency, if I can spell this correctly, for the common parameters. I guess the function name says it all. And of course, what is returned here is what is injected into our functions fetch item and fetch items. Then on the next line, I can create another comment saying this will define the dependency for authorization, okay? Or even authentication, depending on what you want to do. Then I can say, create a function called verify admin underscore admin. And then this function would expect to have an admin key. I'll call it x admin underscore key. And this will be a string. Then we shall check that if this admin key is not equals to admin underscore 123, we then raise an exception. To raise this exception, I'll need to import it. So at the top, I'll say from FastAPI, import HTTP exception. And then I'll say raise HTTP exception, like that. And then parentheses say status code equals to 403, meaning you've been forbidden. Then with a message in the saying detail, so we send messages in this detail attribute or argument, and we say that detail will be equals to, say the message is admin key invalid. Okay. Otherwise, if the admin key is correct, then we can, of course, say return none. Okay. Or implicitly, we know that Python will return none in case we don't explicitly set it. So if successful, the execution will continue to the main path operation, that is using this. But to be able to pick headers, FastAPI has a utility called header, has a header function. So I say from FastAPI import, comma, header, like that. Then I can say this is actually equals to a header. So just doing this, FastAPI will know that this is actually not a query parameter, not a body parameter, not a path parameter, okay, or path variable, but it is a header. So after that, I will now go to the main.py and now use this utility. So how can I use this utility called verify admin? Let me first import it, okay? Go to the top and say from dependencies, import verify admin. On the line where I now need to, maybe I can do for create items, okay, to restrict users. I can open this function, and then in the function body right here, I say comma, okay. Then I can say auth, okay. I say auth will be equals to depends, okay. Depends on verify admin, okay. Can put some authorization. And for auth, we can actually say the type, probably type can be either a string, okay. Either a string. Let's just say none, okay. None. Saying a string would be wrong because we only raise an exception, and if everything happens correctly, if successful, we shall have none returned. So just say none. So if I go back to our interactive documentation and refresh, where is fetch create items, I think this is what we're sizing. We need an X admin key. So if I click try it out, then I put a random key and then say execute. Look at what we get. We get a 403 detail admin key invalid. So we are not allowed to fetch anything, okay, unless the admin key is correct. So what was the correct admin key? It was admin 123. So I'll copy this, go to the code, remove this, paste, move down here, execute. So you see, we get a response body with our data created and a status code of 201. So the data was created successfully. So if I go back here, another application would be if I wanted to restrict, have authorization on maybe an endpoint responsible for deleting, okay, all items. So I'll say define, okay, function called delete all underscore items, delete underscore all items, and then I would say auth, okay, none is the return type, but this would depend on verify admin, okay, so only an admin should be able to delete items. And then up here I can have the path operation decorator by saying app dot delete, then / items, okay, like that. So this is the path operation for deleting. Then on the next line, I can simply return a message, okay, saying return, okay, say the message, in case everything is okay, I'll say all items deleted by admin, something like that. Then on the next line, like you say, authorized true, okay, you've been authorized to delete. So let's try it out. Go to right here, refresh, look for this endpoint. It's right here. You see, delete items. You see the header, and look at this. I forgot to show you something. The xadmin key is a string of type header, so it is a header. If you go to create items, you see we have the header, but we have a request body. Okay, so we have in items we have queries. So we have query parameters. Okay, we have what is called the request body, just as a reminder. Then we also have headers. So I've introduced it to also headers, and you create a header by using this utility called the header from FastAPI. It's simply a function which will ensure that it tells FastAPI that whatever you want to pass here, okay, should come from a header. It's not a query, it's not a body, okay, it's not a path parameter, but a header. All right, so let's try this. If I click try it out and I execute, you see, okay, this is required. If I put a random key, execute, look at that, say detail admin key invalid. So we have security. If I enter the correct admin key, so this is admin 123, execute, look at that, say all items deleted. And of course, when we are deleting, sometimes you may want to return a 200. Okay, sometimes you'll find developers returning a 204 status code. Okay, meaning no content is returned in the body. So this is how we can use dependencies for security in a very basic way. And your dependencies can actually interact with the database. If this is something you want to see in the future, please let me know. I can create a video about it. But actually, if you're very interested in getting deeper into how to use FastAPI, I have a playlist where I'm building a flight booking engine, and I use dependencies to get the current user, perform restrictions for endpoints, and do logins. You can check it out. I'll leave the link in the description. So let me go on to talk about global dependencies in the next section. If we need a dependency to run on every single endpoint in our application, perhaps mandatory authentication, we can define it globally when we initialize the app. This will help to enforce security policy across the whole application with minimal code repetition. I wouldn't want a situation whereby I have to apply this, okay? For example, let's say you have auth right here, then you come here, you add another dependency, you say comma, add that dependency, go ahead, apply it even here, okay, to this, okay? This is, of course, a basic way, but you see that this is all being repeated, okay? We can tell FastAPI to apply this dependency to all path operations, okay, in a single place. And that would be in our definition of FastAPI, right up here, okay, when we initialize the application. So I'll start by going to every path operation, and I remove this auth dependency. Okay, close this. On this other one, where did I apply it? Right here, I'll remove it. Even here, remove it. Then where else have I defined it? This is clean. This looks okay. So in right here, I can simply get into here, and then I can say dependencies, okay, is a configuration we can add, okay, one argument we can pass to FastAPI when we are creating or initializing our application. And then this is actually a list of dependencies. The name says dependencies, not dependency. So many, more than one. And then I can now have the depends function, and I can now pass verify underscore admin. So if I get back right here and refresh, I open the details of welcome. You see, we need the key. We need the key also here. Okay, we need that header. If I go to create items, we also need the xadmin key. This one also requires not this, but rather down here. Okay, it's a header. Notice how we have a path variable, we have a query parameter, and we have a header. So a path operation can have all. Then this other one, okay, also has the header. If I move down, delete items also has the header. So this is how you create a global dependency. Always do this when you want to have an effect on all your path operations. Otherwise, if you don't need this, simply go on and specify them in the definition of the path operation function. In this function here, you can actually add a few things, like the title. I can come here and say title equals to, maybe I can call it, what name can I give it? Inventory API. Inventory API. If I can spell this correctly, inventory API, comma, can have even a description right here. Okay. This is the best API you'll ever use. Okay. Something like that. Just a basic thing. And then I'm missing a comma right here. Save. Then if I get back here and refresh, so you see we have the title, inventory API, and this is the description. So this is how you can add a title, description, and of course the main goal was to show you how to have global dependencies. Let us meet in the next section where we're going to talk about some advanced topics like asynchronous code. FastAPI is fast because it handles I/O operations asynchronously. I'm going to create two functions to help you understand synchronous endpoints and asynchronous endpoints. I will create a function right here called async underscore endpoint. But of course, you know that this is a path operation, and I will decorate it by saying at app.get slow slash sync. Then the next line, and simply say time.sleep for 1 second. Okay. Then of course, I can simply return something basic. Okay. No need to do anything serious since I'm just explaining a point. And of course, at the top, I can import time. So look at this carefully. When you write a function like this, and this function has operations which are blocking, okay? For example, time.sleep is a blocking function, okay? It will block the entire worker process of FastAPI. If you hit this endpoint twice quickly, very quickly, twice, the second request will wait for the first one to finish about 2 seconds total in order for the second response to also be executed. That is what a blocking experience looks like, or a synchronous endpoint looks like. I'm going to create a similar function. If I come down here and say define async underscore endpoint, and then here I will say at app dot get, okay, sf slash maybe slow, but this time async. Next line, I can say return just an empty string. How this function is at this point is still synchronous. For it to become asynchronous or to become non-blocking, so synchronous endpoints are called blocking. endpoints. And asynchronous endpoints are called non-blocking. When do you want to use something which is non-blocking or a synchronous operation? That is when you have I/O operations. Okay, what is an I/O operation? When you have I/O operations, okay, so when you're working with I/O operations, for example, if you want to do a file read, or you want to do any network operation, or you want to maybe work with the database, okay, this is an example of an I/O operation. Okay, and these network calls can easily become very blocking. Okay, so to work with non-blocking code, or to create non-blocking code, the first thing is to create an async def function like this. This is the first step. After that, you can now write code, okay, in your function body, which is non-blocking. An example is if I imported async IO, okay, I can say async IO dot sleep, okay, and then this time I say await, okay, await async IO dot sleep, okay. Using async and await statements, you will have non-blocking code. Meanwhile, in this case, time.sleep is an equivalent of async io.sleep, but time.sleep is blocking or synchronous, but await async io.sleep would be non-blocking or asynchronous. And in this case, if I removed this async, okay, await would fail, okay? You cannot have await, so to use await, you need the async statement. So in case you want to do operations concerning your database, please use await. So async io.sleep or await async io.sleep is an example. Okay. When await is called, when this await is called, the server switches to handle the next request. Okay. Anytime await is called, the server will switch to handle the next request. If you hit this endpoint twice quickly, both requests will run concurrently and finish around the same time. Let's say in about maybe a second total. So with this one request must wait for the other to finish. Okay, that is with synchronous or blocking. One request has to wait for another to finish. But with asynchronous, the request simply goes to the next one. The server switches to the next request. Multiple requests can be executed concurrently. No request has to wait for another. So every time you want to have I/O operations, please use this. Path operations in FastAPI have a very interesting argument. It's called a response model. If I get to the path operation function, actually the path operation decorator, not function, but path operation decorator, have a comma, and then say response model, response underscore model equals, I can control the output. Let me give you a simple example. Assuming I had a function, okay, I'll get rid of this. I have a function which is probably responsible for saving a user, okay? So define a function called register underscore user. And this function is actually, I can say app dot probably post. Okay, let us say get, okay, to make it simple. And it fetches user details. Let's say user slash me. Then instead of register user, I can call it read user. Okay, read user, maybe user me, something like that, to get someone's details. Then at the end, I can say return the user's details, maybe their username. Okay. This path operation function holds that attribute I just talked about called the response model. Using it, I can control what users get, okay? And I specify that the output must match a specific Pydantic structure. To do that, I'll define a model, okay? I'll come here up, just right up here, I say class, create a model called user, and this model is going to inherit from Pydantic, like that. And then this model has attributes like the username. Then we can have the hashed password. And of course, the hashed password is something very, very sensitive. So when we are fetching a user from the database, I can say the DB user, okay, these are from the database. I can say DB user will be equals to user, okay, and then we can do just simulate testing, okay. We're just simulating fetching, not testing, but simulating a fetch. Maybe we have a username, okay, of a person who is testing is called tester, okay, and then we now have also the randomly hashed password, okay. This is the password, and later we can say return db user, okay. Without response model, if we just leave this like this, okay, we shall return a user with sensitive information like the hashed password. This is not good. To be able to change what the person or what the client receives, we can create another model. I can say class user out, and this will be also inherit from base model. And then we can only include the username. So username, which is a string. And then in the path operation decorator, I can say response model equals to user out. By doing this, FastAPI will ensure that the response returned matches that what we have defined here is the user out, and that only the username will be returned, which will automatically filter out the sensitive hashed password. So response model is simply an argument that you pass a Pydantic model to, and it helps you to control and restrict the output that clients of your APIs see or receive. And this is critical for security. Like in this case, you don't want to expose passwords. So make use of response models and as much as you can. And of course, you can place these models in another Python module. We can test this. I'll run the application. Go to our interactive documentation and then look for that endpoint. Click, try it out. Let's pass the admin key, admin123. Execute. I see we only get username in the response body, and yet we have the hashed password. If I remove this, see what happens. Come here, execute. I think we have the hashed password. You don't want to reveal this kind of information. It can be a security vulnerability. So I'll go back, undo, come here, execute, and this is a better response. To see a more complex application of FastAPI, check out this playlist. I'll leave a link in the description, which will show you how I apply FastAPI to a real-world project. There are so many features and a lot that you can learn. These videos are live streams where you'll see me making mistakes and learning in public. Have a look. You would learn a lot.